You're all very welcome to our webinar on developing action plans for office-based organisations and production companies. Thank you all for coming. It's great to have you all here today. The team today delivering the webinar is Claire Buckley, who I will be handing over to shortly from Julie's Bicycle. Claire, when you kick off, I might ask you to introduce yourself a little bit further. My name is Megan Best. I'm the Director and CEO of Native Events here in Dublin. We've been working with the Arts Council for quite some time on their policy and plan and developing this suite of training programme for you. And in the driving seat in the background is our programmes manager, Brecon Byron, who will be managing the chat and the Q&A and the polls and really making sure that our webinar runs smoothly today. So you're all very welcome from the whole team here. To kind of give you a bit of a run through of the programme, and some of you may have been on our previous sessions and I have a bit of sight across this now and the way that we're rolling this out. But essentially what's happening is we're running training webinars, once a week on Tuesdays every week. So we started at the beginning of June with policy development, and we did 2 sessions on that. One was just getting started on policy development. The second was getting people on board. And then today we're doing 2 versions of developing action plans. So one was to develop action plans for public facing buildings and bigger energy users. That was this morning. And today's session is on developing action plans for office-based organisations and production companies. And we will chat a little bit further on that, on how we kind of divvied up those different organisations and our approach for both. But that's the way that we've categorised it. Next week, then, we'll be doing a session on measuring impacts, on impact measurement. And at the beginning of July, it's nature and biodiversity. And then throughout July, we're doing sessions on buildings, energy, materials and procurement. And then we will take a bit of a break in August and come back in September and October for training for festivals, because we recognise that they're in their production cycles right now. And there will be some more sessions towards the end of the year. But this is kind of the layout of the training programme in and of itself. The timings then are pretty much every Tuesday from 10 to 11 in the morning going forward. Next slide there, please, Claire, when you're ready. Thanks. So yeah, the way that we've divided up the 2 sessions, and actually, Claire, I might invite you in to speak a little bit further on this in terms of the slightly different approach for the different types of activities of the different organisations that this programme is here to deliver.
Thanks, Megan. So hello to everybody and welcome from me. If you haven't been to any of the previous sessions, my name is Claire Buckley and I work for Julie's Bicycle. I've been working for 10 years with the arts and culture organisations of many different shapes, sizes and art forms to help them develop their environmental approaches. Over the course of developing this training series, we did a lot of thinking about how to organise it. We know that within Arts Council funded, strategic funded organisations and art centres, there's a huge range of activity, size, shape, art form. So we thought really carefully about that when we were developing this programme. And we also did a discovery phase where we talked to about 30 organisations, resource organisations, production companies, festivals, venues, etc. So we know that what you can do, environmentally speaking, is very different depending on where you are, what you do, and who you do it with. So this has been one of the reasons that we we've split the action planning sessions into 2. So the one this morning was more focused on organisations with public facing buildings or where high energy use is a more significant impact. And that's mainly for the likes of theatres and art centres and galleries, which are obviously more public facing, but also the likes of studios, print facilities, fabrication facilities, where energy use and the building itself can have quite a significant impact. And then other organisations, such as some resource or membership organisations who have public-facing buildings, which will have more significant energy use. And then this afternoon, our session now is more focused on office-based organizations, so membership or resource organizations with non-public facing buildings, production companies, organizations such as those involved in publishing. We know that in the middle, there are some organizations which kind of cut across both. So resource organizations which have a larger building, which might have more significant energy use, multi-venue indoor festivals, and then some organizations who have both a mix of a venue and festival or production activities. So what we're focusing on today is what you see there on the right-hand side of the slide. So what we would like to do is just check with you who's here. And we have a poll question for you, just if you hopefully can find yourself within that list, just so we can get a sense of who's here. Okay, so we have a fairly good mix, majority resource organizations, some with and without public buildings, few production companies, festivals, and we have some other venues as well, and we have a few from publishing. Okay, that's great. Thank you for that. So just following on to say, if you have joined the first two sessions over the last 2 weeks, hopefully you'll already feel that you have an understanding of what a climate action and environmental policy should cover and how to go about developing it, and also how you can identify and map out your impact, and really importantly, where you have more control and influence over this. And then we also covered why it's important to get people on board in developing your approach and how to go about identifying who to engage and different ways of doing this. So these are all different steps in a process. Now, developing a policy and an action plan is not always the most linear process. It is a process a bit iterative, going back to people, finding out a bit more information, getting people's thoughts. But these are roughly kind of the two key things, areas that we covered in the first two sessions. If you didn't manage or you didn't join those first two sessions, you can get the recordings up on the Arts Council website, and the link is in there. So what are the aims of this session? Really, what we hope is that you're going to come away with a good idea of what an action plan, what a good action plan should cover and look like. And second, we cannot tell you what you should focus on and what you should include in your action plan, but we will really hope to give you a sense of the key areas that you should be roughly thinking about, given what your area of activity is and where you're doing it. And hopefully you will come out from this session with a good sense of, okay, right, this is what we need to do. And these are the next steps to start putting that into place. We are going to cover a quick recap of what we covered in sessions 1 and 2, which we just did. And then what that action plan should include, how to go about developing it. We've got a range of different examples, some more theoretical and some more real. And then a few tips on the do's and don'ts and some little tools to think about in that process. There will be time for Q&A at the end, but we will stop recording before we get into the Q&A. So, developing your action plan. I think this can feel like quite an overwhelming task sometimes for organizations, because there may be so many different things that you could do, and trying to figure out what you can do realistically and what you can achieve can sometimes feel a bit overwhelming. So hopefully we'll help you with that today. I would like to just do a bit of a recap on the difference between a policy and a plan, which we have looked at previously in the other sessions. But again, just to say, your policy is that broad framework which sets out your ambitions and what you want to achieve. It should be really specific to who you are and what you do, bring some accountability and responsibility, and provide that framework for the more specific environmental action that you are going to take. So then you have your plan of action, which then lays out, okay, this is how we are going to achieve what we have set out. And this will vary greatly across organizations. It might be more practical stuff about reducing impacts in your buildings or the places where you hold your productions or activities. It might be looking at more sustainable production practice. It might be looking at procurement. And then there is, of course, what is really key within the arts and culture sector is that ability to inform, inspire, and support change. So this is maybe an area where you have some opportunities to do something. And then the third key area, which we would normally recommend covering in an action plan, is around comms and engagement. A lot of organizations do a policy and plan together. We have just put in an example here from Cushcane, which is publicly available on their website. They have a very succinct policy, which is very clear and specific to them. And then they have also the second part of that document is an environmental action plan. They've got a number of key themes and they've set objectives within those areas and then specific actions that they're going to take to achieve them. So a nice example, but again, we would always recommend having that broader statement commitment in a policy and then the more specifics in an action plan. And very often the action plans, so organizations may choose to share their policy, but rarely the specific action plan, in particular if you've got names or budgets against it. So I think the key thing to think about an action plan is it shouldn't be just something where you go, okay, right, let's just do a big list of actions. It needs to really be situated in an understanding and connection to what you're all about and what you do. And in that context, what your key areas of impact are, or where you may have activities which are more about influence, support, or behavior change. So in the first webinar, we covered the key steps of getting started, which is thinking about your activities and where the related impacts are. The second webinar was more focused on how do you map out and start engaging and consulting with the key people and groups who need to be involved in figuring out your priorities and what you're going to do about them. And then the two webinars today are about where do you go then in terms of setting out more specific aims and figuring out how you're going to achieve them. This might sound a bit obvious, but what we would really, it's just so important to not begin at the end and just kind of go, okay, we have a list of things that we know we should do or could do, and then just do that. It is a process, and it will have the most impact and the most meaning and the most value for your organization if it is rooted in that understanding of your activities and impacts, and if you have engaged people in that process. Because otherwise you might have an amazing action plan, fabulous actions, targets, but if people haven't been involved in that, if they haven't given their inputs, if they don't know what the hell they're supposed to be doing, it's not really going to be particularly successful. So a lot of people have asked for templates, and I think we have tried to give you some good guidelines and frameworks for this. Every action plan is different. It depends on your organization, your culture, the culture of your organization, etc. But there are definitely a few key things that we would say should be covered in your action plan. It should have agreed priorities, aims, objectives, or targets. They can be broad, or if you have a really good understanding of particular areas of impact, you might be able to set a specific target. They should include, the plan should include a breakdown of the action. So how are you actually going to achieve what you've set out? They should include who is responsible for those actions. In some cases, might be the person leading on it, but they may have other people supporting. They should include some kind of deadline or time frame for taking those actions. What you need, if you need people's time or some budget or some other kind of resource to complete the action, that should also be included in the action plan. And then ideally, this is probably one of the most difficult bits, is like, what do you expect the outcome to look like? Do you have some indicator or measure of success that will help you know, right, we've done all this stuff and it has made this difference. Very often what we see is a list of actions, and then you can tick the box and say, we did this, 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 and this, but knowing what difference it actually made is the fine art of a good action plan. This is a very simple example of how you could structure your action plan. So starting with what is the priority, the aim, the objective, or the target. What are the actions to get there? Who's responsible? Within what time frame? Is there any budget or other resource required? And then that magic, do you have some way of knowing the outcome or how successful it's been? So we've given a couple of examples based on our experience and our discussions, in particular during the discovery phase before we develop the training. This is an example of what we could say would be a typical resource organization with who's based in an office in a shared building. So not a big building, not a building they would have much control over, and not a public facing building. So very typically what it would be is something around your office practice. So, you know, what you're using in terms of green procurement, you know, what is good office practice. Although you won't be able to have much control or influence usually over things like the energy, where it comes from, and energy efficiency measures in the wider building. Another common topic for resource organizations is business travel, but a lot of organizations have said to us, you know, we don't actually travel that much anymore. But it is an area which people are interested in, and where they feel that they can do something about. So that is definitely an issue which comes up a lot. Another area which comes up a lot is around marketing and comms, websites, print publications, online publications, and there is a good bit of scope to do some good stuff there. Events is definitely a key thing which comes up with resource organizations, and this is something they have more control over in terms of deciding where it's going to happen, working with the venue, working at the catering, and things like that. And then there is the whole area around the heart of what the organization does in terms of working with artists, with organizations, arts organizations, in terms of providing support and resource and programming. And then the other area is around networking, advocacy, and collaboration. And we've got a few examples to show you on that. So this is probably roughly and typically what you would expect a resource organization in a shared building, which is office-based, the kind of things you would expect to see covered within an action plan. And this is an example of what that plan might look like, picking up on a few different areas. So the first is, okay, actually, we don't understand our business travel impacts yet, but we want to understand it, and we want to have a clearer policy about this and what we can do. So the action there is, first of all, around building that understanding, looking at existing practice and policy, talking to the team, and then by the end of that process, having a good means of monitoring business travel impacts and having a clear travel policy in place, which is shared and understood across the team. Another example is a priority around greening events, involving some consultation with venues, piloting a green rider and sustainable catering approach for like a key annual events, and then taking the learning from that and rolling it out to some other events over time. And then the third area there is around core activity, if you like, for resource membership organizations, which is about supporting members in what they do. We had, we spoke to 10 different resource organizations earlier on in the year. And actually most, it turned out, were doing something in terms of projects or talks or specific commissioning even to help the organizations or artists they work with on environmental action and themes and creative responses. So that was wonderful to see. So I'm not going to go into the detail of that, but that is just to give an example of what we think for a resource organization without a public facing building, what roughly the key areas of focus should be for an action plan, and then an example of how that might look when you start mapping it out. And now this is another example for a production company. So again, I think the key thing here is that while there will be some kind of office-based activity, the heart of what a production company is doing is going to be done elsewhere in the productions that, which are taking place in other venues, in other spaces, or which are touring. So there is some element of thinking about office operations and team travel. There is a question, an area of focus, which is often around internal training and engagement for those involved in the production process and the artists with whom you're working and the venues. Sorry, not the venues. There is another area of focus, which would be around networking and sector collaboration, because there's a whole load of different areas, production, design, lighting, etc., which production companies are connected into and which can help in terms of solutions and learning from others what's out there. Digital and websites can be another area for production company. But of course, the heart of what a production company should be looking at environmentally is the actual production process itself, from the planning and the design to the materials and the rehearsals and the impact that it has. And then looking at touring and where it's happening, and thinking about collaboration with what the opportunities are working with the host venues, and also of course thinking about touring and transport and travel impacts around the tour. This is an example from a production company called Walk the Plank, which is based in Manchester, who we have done quite a lot of work with. And over time, they have developed a really strong range of actions in different areas. So they start, of course, they have good practice in terms of their office. They've recently got green hosting for their website, and they have a quite comprehensive internal team training program. In terms of their production work, particular projects, they've worked really closely with Manchester City Council on green production for the Manchester Day annual outdoor events. They have done a massive pilot project, I would say, for a production called Green Spaces, Dark Skies. They collaborate with a network in the city called the Greater Manchester Arts Sustainability Team. And through that collaboration, they've also developed some fantastic engagement pieces, such as the Climate Mythbuster, which you can see here. And they've also worked in terms of collaboration with another organization called Without Walls, and developed a green production lab with them. So this is kind of like just giving you an example of the different areas across which a production company can work. So starting at home, at the office, with the website, to looking at the broader the production practice, and then wider collaboration. I am going to hand over to Megan now for the next part.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, and just to reiterate that with the production companies and the broad range of what we can do, like any production is an example of multi-stakeholder engagement. So there's lots and lots and lots of different opportunities for impact and reach and actions that we can take. Brecon, if you're okay to drive it, we're going to do another poll now. And we're going to ask everybody to give us a bit of an understanding on where you are on your action plan or developing your action plan. So there's a couple of options there. And yeah, I see that people are jumping straight into it and responding on the poll. So let's see where we get to in terms of where everybody's at. Lots of people just getting started thinking about it. That's okay. That's why we're here, to help you, support you, and hopefully kind of give you a bit of a framework or something to work from. Some people are working on it already. It's great. We have the beginnings of a good plan. I know that feeling. And we don't have an action plan, but we have done a lot. We experience this a lot. A lot of action has been taken by practitioners in the sector. Quite a lot of people have really gotten started and done some initiatives, but not necessarily have written it down or gone into that kind of coordination space with it. But it's fantastic to see that there are so many of you that are just starting to think about it, because hopefully these resources and this webinar will really help. Okay, great. I think that's us. Thank you very much, Brecon. Claire, I might hand back over to you. I think you've got some examples and case studies, and I do too, but I think you can probably kick off and then we'll get in.
Yeah. Thanks. And again, just to say, the examples which we are going to show here are more oriented to resource organizations and production companies. There are some great examples also from this morning's sessions, which are focused on theatres and art centres in particular. So if you weren't at that session and you are an art centre, I would definitely recommend having a look at that. So a few examples. I'm going to start with Performing Artists Forum, previously known as Theatre Forum. And they have been taking action in different ways for quite a long time. From, I think, probably at the heart of it and the start of it, providing a space through the Green Arts Initiative in Ireland to provide training, resource, pilot projects, and opportunities for discussion to the organisations, venues and theatres that they work with. They have also now started very much looking at their events, and in particular the gathering, the one which happened in Sligo in May, and they really tried to develop their approach around greening that event. In terms of sector collaboration and exchange and learning and supports, they have a number of working groups already, and they are setting up a Green Arts working group at the moment. And through the Green Arts Initiative, they do a range of sessions and exchanges and training. And the example here of one which happened last week was with the Irish Society for Production Designers, which was focusing on a very specific topic of shifting from tungsten to LED lighting. So again, I think that's an example of the different ways Performing Arts Forum is taking action, from the practical with its events to that wider sector supports, member support, and then that wider sector collaboration and advocacy. Sorry. Another example here is from Visual Artists Ireland. They have also been working on this for quite a long time and have developed quite an integrated approach where they try and thread environmental action throughout what they do. They've made their action plan available on their website just recently. And this is the way that they structured it, from kind of key themes from business practice to materials, to energy, and then education and awareness. And what's really interesting about their approach is that they've got a list of actions, and then they provide information on where they're at with those actions. But when those actions actually just become embedded in standard practice, they go, right, okay, that's not an action anymore. It's just the way we do things. And then it becomes business as usual, which I think is a lovely example and way of looking at it. And one other thing I'd say about them, they have office space in a shared building, and they don't have much control or influence over their energy source and energy use. But one of the things that they're working on is looking with their landlord at what opportunities there are to have cleaner energy, and to give them more independence over the energy use in their space. This is something which has come up in a lot of discussions with different organizations which are office-based. The real majority just don't have the ability to make any changes over energy source and energy use. So I think that's a lovely example. This is a completely different example, which is from Arts Council England, with whom I have worked for a long time. They developed an action plan which has 6 priorities around people, place, travel, technology, procurement, and pension. I'm not going to go through in detail. What I did want to say was, in this example, they already had a really good understanding of their different areas of impact, and they knew that business travel and staff commuting was like one of their biggest areas of impact. And having that information enabled them to set quite a specific target and set of actions of what they were going to do about that. In terms of business travel, they have much more control over it. In terms of staff commuting, of course, you do not dictate to people how they come to work, but they have identified some things that they could do in that area. So I particularly wanted to give that as an example where an organization has already got good data and can set targets. That is not always the case. In some cases, just you've got to get the understanding and the information first before you figure out what kind of targets you can set. This example here is from an organization based in London called Boundless Theatre. It's a small organization. They have an office, they do hybrid working, and they do a number of projects and 1 to 2 productions every year. They started out, they focused on the practical actions around their office, travel, and procurements. Then they were looking at the different projects that they do and assigning somebody for each project who looks at what sustainability means for that project and how to carry out that project in a more sustainable way. And they also developed one of their productions which had a climate theme. It was called How to Save the Planet When You're a Young Carer. And they did that in consultation with their youth advisory group, because they're all about working with young people. So again, a nice example of a mix of different approaches from a production office-based organization. Again.
Great, yeah, thanks Claire for all of those. And I'll jump back in with a couple more kind of examples and case studies here for you. I wanted to touch on some of the information that came back from the production companies when we were doing the discovery phase in the development of this program. And the actions that some of the different production companies and some of the festivals that we were speaking to had taken. So one of the guys I spoke to had adjusted the work schedules in terms of the builds for the props and the different activities that they were doing, because they were working in a really big, very drafty, hard to heat warehouse. And they just discovered that instead of trying to heat it over the winter and watching all of the heating bills rise and all of this going and all of the heat and everything that they were trying to create there just wafting through the drafts in the ceiling, they adjusted their work schedules instead. So the way that they're programming their year is now in a more seasonal way, which responds better both to the environment and their pocket. Another action that had been taken by quite a few people was really getting into materiality and considering the materials that are being used and having an action plan around that in terms of recycling and repurposing materials. And those of us in the arts sector are very good at this because, again, the materials that we buy are a budgetary constraint, but making it an actual action on an action plan with a deliverable, with somebody who's responsible for it, was something that they were doing. Another one was understanding the paints and adhesives and doing the research around better use of materials for all of these. And something that came through as a bit of a thread as well was those kind of the development of those strategic long-term partnerships as an action. And we're seeing this quite a lot in native events as well, whereby there's the opportunity for partnerships and how you go about developing those partnerships and collaborations, so that they can feed into an action plan, because all of these actions can't be undertaken by one individual or one person alone. So getting together for those longer term partnerships. And then another final piece to kind of touch on here was considering different and using different partnerships for the different programs that we want to present. So how are we presenting? What are the themes that we want to present? And whether there is an action that can be part of our plan towards potentially partnering with environmental charities or with other people as part of the programs for our productions and for our festivals going forward. If you want to go to the next slide there, Claire. A very quick case study on Body and Soul Festival for the festivals amongst us today and for the production companies. Now, I worked for Body and Soul for many, many years, so I can tell you all about this one, but this is a very quick overview of our sustainability strategy that we developed. Now, the sustainability strategy was called Us and You. And the reason that we called our strategy that was because all of the stuff that we were doing internally as a festival, and then all of the stuff that we were asking our attendees or our audience to do. So it was very much a two-pronged approach. And what we did was we did a certain number of actions every year, took our learnings from that every year, and then created a new sustainability strategy for the year following. So it always had a foundation of the previous year to grow on. So the different kind of actions that we took, we introduced a green campsite and a green trader award. There were certain criteria for caterers and all of this kind of stuff. We implemented a smart power plan that was to reduce the power that we need to aim for energy efficiency. We switched our waste management supplier. That's a really big action for a festival to take, especially because if it's going to give you better control and better reporting on the waste that's created. And an action that we wanted to do was to increase the messaging around sustainability year on year. So that was understanding where it was placed in terms of our social media messaging or our email campaigns and where it was placed in the program itself. And then what we wanted the audience to do was to, first and foremost, to take the bus or carpool. We offered a lot of incentives around that. We invited our audience to bring reusable water bottles. We really pushed the messaging around using the correct bins on site and to sign a code of conduct for the Us and You campsite. So the overarching strategy was called Us and You, and then we had a green campsite, an eco campsite called Us and You. And we asked people to take their tents home and so on and so forth. Now, what ended up happening was at the Body and Soul Festival, over the course of the 6 years of the sustainability strategy building on itself year on year, was by 2019, 6,000 or half of the people had signed up to stay in that campsite. And as you can see here, this was the festival campsite, which is a very rare photo for a festival campsite on a Monday morning when everybody's packing up to go home, but it was left spotless. And that's a kind of a bit of a nod to the power of a sustainability strategy with dedicated people working on it, with responsibilities dedicated towards it, towards the behavior change. Now, I know a lot of the festivals that we are working with through this program with the Arts Council aren't necessarily camping festivals, so the approach might be a little bit different. But what I'm trying to get at is having the audience messaging as a specific action in an action plan has huge opportunities for impact and reach. So there's a lot of focus sometimes on waste or energy, but messaging and communications is a really key part too. I wanted to do a very quick case study of the Galway Film Fleadh as well. These guys have a sustainability plan that is available on their website, so anybody can go and take a look at this. And there's some really nice ways that they've gone at focused on different actions that the FLA is taking itself as well. So for example, with the venues that they're working with around Galway, they're providing advice on travel for audiences where they are on bus routes, whether you can cycle to them, how to get around. They have this policy in place for their partners and their events on reusables and combating food waste. They're giving advice on travel for their guests on the travel from international guests that are coming into Dublin Airport potentially, and what the public transport routes are like, and also on travel around Galway itself. They've reduced their printing and reduced their lanyards and brought in a lot of reusability in terms of their marketing and communications. And they moved into a new office in 2023, I believe, or 2022, and they worked on LED lighting and thermostatic heating for that. Now, this sustainability plan of the Galway Film FLA is available on their website, so anybody can go and look at it. And actually, Brecken, if you get a moment, you might drop the link into the chat there, because it's a really nice example. It's not necessarily published with time bound and the responsibilities, that part is internal, but the actions that they're taking and the plan that they're taking, they have stated that publicly, and that is available for people to see. I do have one further example, and this is a sustainable tour rider for an international tour that I was reviewing there over the weekend. And what's really nice about this one is that although this is an international tour and it's a big production, this kind of a rider or this kind of sustainable events policy could be used by anybody in any production company or resource organization. If you're putting on an event or if you're going on tour, there are certain things that you can ask for of the venues that you're working with. So the way this one was broken down was into 5 different impact areas, and they had 2 tiers to it, where they have the essential things that they were asking of their venues and the desirable things, which were they were also asking of to work towards larger goals. So if you want to go on there, Claire. So in terms of essentials, and I love this one because it's straight out and it's the first thing that they say. In terms of water, no plastics whatsoever. And it sounds like a really simple thing now because we've all started to move away from plastics, but stating that in an event rider or in a venue rider, in a production rider, really sets the intent and the tone. Other bits and pieces that they were looking at was the promotion of this, asking guests to bring refillable bottles, and all of the kind of things that you could ask of a venue in terms of the automatic taps and the low flow or high efficiency water appliances, all of the different bits and bobs. You want to go on there, Claire? Thanks. In terms of waste, this is another really, it seems like a really simple one, but again, it just kind of gives somebody, if you're working with a venue or if you're working on an event, it gives somebody the checklist to go back to in terms of what it is that we're looking to achieve and the impacts and the actions that that venue can take in their work with you. So setting up properly labeled waste stations, a minimum of general waste and recycling, and then potentially if there's a composting contract to bring that in as well, and placing really nice signage and messaging around the venue to help with separation. And then in terms of desirable impacts and actions to take with the venues, it's about moving away from resource use in the first place. So reducing any of the waste that might be created by a tour, going paperless, providing volunteers or stewards to monitor waste stations, and aiming to be zero waste to landfill. Some really nice examples there. Food again. No plastics is pretty essential for this one. Serving all food in compostable, easy recyclable, or reusable wherever possible. And that's a really big one. The more reusable serveware we use, the better. Providing at least one vegan or vegetarian meal option. And then again, no single-use plastic bottles or cups to be sold or used. So again, this is just something that we can require from the venues that we're working with. And this is actually very applicable as well to a multi-venue festival in a rural town, for example. It's a simple checklist, a rider that we can give to the venues that we're asking to take part in the festival. Desirable, and then again, so moving from essential to desirable, sourcing local, organic and seasonal produce, and sourcing meat that's certified humane, or just starting to have those conversations with our venues and our caterers. Skipping one there, Claire is moving along through the slides at speed for me there. A really big piece around all of this is audience travel. So in terms of action items for events or for resource organizations when they're putting together their policies around events, audience travel, and for festivals and production companies, getting to grips with audience travel, which is a huge impact area for those, is a really big one. So that kind of essential piece around promoting low carbon transport options, really, really important. And having that front and center in all of those kind of messaging and comms campaigns is brilliant. Sending an audience travel survey to post-show to all the ticket holders, to all the attendees. Again, this is a really nice one to set the stall at the very beginning in terms of having this as an essential piece, because that really helps when you start going into that impact measurement and understanding the devil in the detail around the impacts for your events. And then, of course, there's desirable premium parking for electric vehicles. I love this one. Maybe not as relevant in Ireland just yet, but we are moving towards it. And considering all of those different incentives, an exclusive gift for those who cycle to the show. I love that one as well. And of course, there's always an option to get creative with it. And then the last piece then for this rider was around power, if I remember correctly. So again, essentially trying to limit or eliminate fossil fuel generators, asking all of the outsourced vendors to use low energy equipment. And if their generators are needed for a show, to attempt alternative fuels. And then desirable, and actually this should be an essential one as well, is turning off equipment and area lighting but not in use. So a really strict switch off policy that everybody's on board with. That's a very easy thing to implement, and it just means getting a bit of engagement and buy-in from venue staff. So that was it in terms of a whistle-stop tour, in terms of some of those kind of more festivals or production case studies in terms of creating action plans. Claire, I might hand back over to you there.
Thanks, Megan. So we've already seen that you are in different stages in developing your own action plans. When we did the National Roadshow a couple of months ago, we asked people what kind of actions they were taking. You can see there's a lot of focus on energy and lighting, travel in particular, single-use plastics, and waste. We just would love to know if you have already been taking some action, if you would share it in the chat, just share some examples of the kind of things that you've been doing, especially if there's something that you're particularly proud of. Thank you, Alan. Bringing your own water bottles and reusable cups. Yeah, that's great. I think that's something that, as Megan was saying, you're starting to see more and more. No plastic bottles. Oh, that's a really interesting one, Kirsty, encouraging international companies to tour while they're in Ireland. So if they're coming, to make the most of that time and go around, which has benefits, of course, all around. Food, no plastics. Oh, Damien, that's fantastic. Lots of great stuff there. Green stationery. That's, I think also, you know, a very visible thing for the people who work for an organization, and something where that's what you decide and you can say, yeah, we're going to make that change, and it's visible to the people who work with you. As green cleaning, refill cleaning supplies. That's a lovely example as well. Again, I think, you know, what we tend to do is really start with the things that we have more control over. And that is very much something that we would recommend you look at when you're thinking about initial actions. Then maybe as you get on, you know, make further progress on those areas, then you can think more broadly beyond that. Great, thanks for sharing, everybody. So hopefully you found those examples useful. These are from organizations who have been doing this for quite a while, but hopefully that's given you a sense of the kind of things they're focused on and the ways that they've approached it. A couple of do's and don'ts for you in terms of your own action plans. some of this. Apologies if it starts. So it's stating the obvious. The first thing for an action plan we would say is do make sure that when you develop your plan, it connects and is clearly linked to what you have laid out in your broader policy. And that is as opposed to just developing a random list of actions which have no clear link at all to what you have set out more broadly in your policy. And the second thing is be realistic about what you can achieve and do, given what your starting point is, because there is no point in setting some crazy net zero ambitious aims or targets unless you really understand what that means and feel like there is some hope of achieving it. The next thing that we would say is absolutely don't forget or do involve people concerned in how to achieve the aims. So if you are saying overall we want to develop much greener practice in our offices or much greener business practice, then doing that without involving the general manager and the key people working in the office is going to be it's going to be a lot harder. Be clear in your action plan who is responsible for what. The flip side of that, and absolutely to avoid, is giving people responsibility for an action without them having the authority or the resource they need to actually do it. Another key thing to think about in terms of an action plan is sometimes it's really okay to just have a plan for plan. Sometimes you need to better understand things first. You need to do a bit of research, you need to talk to people, you need to better understand the energy use or the waste or the materials. That is absolutely fine. And much better than setting out specific aims or targets if you really don't have the evidence or the understanding on which to base it. And then the last two things in terms of do's is really just share the plan with the wider team, even if it's not everybody has something to do, but just share it and make sure people are aware of it. And the final point is, remember, it's an iterative process. So you set out what you want to achieve, how you're going to achieve it, who's going to do it. Go back, look at it, see how it's doing, see if it made the difference you wanted it to make, and then think about updating it as needs be on a more regular basis. Some very kind of simple steps in terms of getting started. To find 5 top things you want to achieve, 5 priorities, aims, objectives. Maybe you're already able to set some more specific targets and when you want to achieve them by, and then go through a workout involving the people who need to be involved or who might be responsible in working out how to do it, what the action is, when, if any, resource requirements are necessary. A couple of other tips in terms of developing your action plans. I think we've all heard of SMART objectives. We have added in here SMART-T in terms of developing an action plan. And this is about being specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound, but also thinking about inclusivity and equity in terms of your actions. Have you included people? Have you thought about the implication of bringing in slow travel options for artists from the Global South? Have you thought about the implications of greener audience travel options for people with disabilities? I know we have done some work recently around live events and how to make sure that green measures are also accessible and inclusive of people with disabilities. So I think about those issues when you're developing your action plan. Work things through as a team. Get together. You know, if you've identified the key areas, get people together. Go, what are we doing? What could we do? Who needs to be involved? And really just talk it through. This is an example of a pretty simple worksheet we've done with different organizations. This is another example from Watershed, venue in Bristol, where they mapped out, okay, what are we already doing? What could we do? What could we do if we had some money or some resource or something else? And then what would we love to do, but it's just simply not possible. So a very pragmatic way of approaching it. Don't forget to ask people to think about what they can do in their roles. If you come up with a whole, like if you have a whole list of things that you think you could do and you've done a big brainstorming, think about how you might prioritize them. This is a nice simple tool if you've got a whole load of different actions on post-its, and just kind of go through and go, how easy or not would that to be, and what kind of effect would that have in terms of positive environmental effects. And start at the beginning and not the end. Please do keep best practice in mind. We would absolutely say focus, for example, on using less energy in the first place, as opposed to looking at the EcoBlame solar panel solution. Or instead of focusing all of your energy on waste segregation and recycling, think about what you can do to stop producing that waste in the first place. That might sound very simple, but I think we would really, really stress that. Think about best practice principles, how you can design out waste and pollution, how you can avoid it happening in the first place, and how you can do positive things. And the last point, just at 3 is just to remember it's an iterative process. So what we have gone through in the previous sessions is starting with who you are, what you do, where you do it, and why. And in that context, why does climate action matter? Then going through this process of identifying what you should be focusing on, getting some information, prioritizing, getting people on board, engaging them, planning what you can do, doing it, and then going, oh, how did that go? And that went well, that didn't go so well, and then kind of going back and then thinking what comes next. So it really is an iterative process. I hope that has been helpful in terms of giving you a sense of what to think about in terms of different areas of focus for your action plans, what the action plan could look like, and how to go about it. Megan has already gone through the different training sessions which are coming up. Just to say, next week is focused on measuring impacts. And also I would flag that we have some time available towards the end of the year to provide some group on one-to-one support around the policies and plans which you may have developed. So I would just like to say a big thank you to all of you for joining us today and for sticking with us until the very end.